Hi, everyone, and welcome to Round the Horn. Our special guest today is Lee Mrowicki. Now, Lee has had a long history in the music business since way long time ago in the dark ages, and at the same time had a career in baseball, starting off with Little League and Babe Ruth and Jersey Shore. So let's get together with Lee and talk about baseball and music here on Round the Horn. Hi, Lee. How you doing? Hi. Thanks, and I appreciate you having me on the episode today. Well, let's go back to the beginning of time for a little bit of your biography in baseball. Well, it started out when I was about 4 years old with my father, Lee Sr. And we lived in Jersey City at the time, and there was a stadium nearby called Roosevelt Stadium. It's kind of famous because it was the first time that any Black player had played in the minor leagues, and that was Jackie Robinson. He played at the Triple A level for the Montreal Royals, and they played a minor league game at Roosevelt Stadium. But on the side of the field, of the stadium itself, were some practice fields and softball fields. And that's where my father would take us, me and later on my brother, to practice the game, take batting practice, throw, etc. My father was a great softball pitcher in his time. So we learned a little bit about baseball through that, as well as being a Yankee fan growing up and watching them on WPIX Channel 11 with Mel Allen. And there were so many great announcers. So I started out in Little League for the Jersey City Little League, and I forgot what the team's name was. It might have been the Giants, but I'm not sure. Then moved to the Our Lady of Chenstohova Little League, which was the school Little League, and I was a pitcher. Now, back in Jersey City, since the houses were so close together, you had to play in the street, and if there was nobody around to play with, and we usually played like stickball and box ball, games like that, you would actually just go outside with your glove and a tennis ball or a rubber ball and throw it against a wall somewhere. And I took some chalk and drew like a home plate and a batter's box on a neighbor's wall, and that's how I learned how to pitch. And I imitated all the great players of that day, including Whitey Ford. So we moved down the shore when I was 12 years old. And of course, it was time to play ball again in the summertime. So we tried out at the Neptune Little League. Now, I was a pretty big kid at the time for a 12-year-old. So a couple of teams were interested, and I made my way over to a guy who said, I'd like to draft you for my team. They're called the Giants. Unfortunately, they wear green and white as their colors. Now, here's a strange thing. Now, we laugh about it now, but back then we didn't think anything of it. His name was Frank Stein. Yes, his middle initial was N. So my Little League coach was Frank N. Stein, and he was a good guy. We had some great times. I played first base and I pitched, and then moved over to Babe Ruth League, where I played for a team called the Pirates, and started a friendship with the Beekman family, and my father was a coach there too. Well, we progressed into high school, so I played in freshman and JV and varsity, and luckily to be named to the Asbury Park Press and New York Daily News All-Star teams. And I think there were a couple of scouts every once in a while. But then I decided that I was going to go to college. And I went for a year at Rider College, or it's now University, near Trenton, New Jersey. Unfortunately, the baseball season had some interruptions because of riots in Trenton. So I decided, since we were restricted to campus then, is to take 6 months off. And I then enrolled at Monmouth University, Monmouth College at the time. And that's how I got actually involved more in the music business than in baseball. But I still played in the summer leagues, the Jersey Shore League, and I'd started working part-time for the Asbury Park Press, and the guys there knew I played baseball, and they had a softball team, and they said, would you like to be, our center fielder? We know you're pretty fast, and we think you'll love playing for us. Well, I started playing softball, and strange as it may seem, since I was working part-time nights and on weekends, I had to cram in baseball. So here's my schedule for a weekend. Friday was okay. Got rid of the delivery of newspapers that I did along the beachfront in Monmouth County, and then came home and played an after or evening game. And then on Saturday morning, I had to get up early and deliver newspapers. And then in the afternoon, play a double header, actually, on Saturdays, baseball. Sundays, I got up early and I had to deliver newspapers. And then I went to play softball and played a double header, which really didn't take that long, 2 hours maybe. So we started at 10 o'clock. I was over by noontime, and then changed uniforms and went to play another doubleheader in baseball. That was my schedule. It got kind of crazy after a while. So our baseball team had dissolved. Softball was kind of it for a while because a lot of my friends played. So I played Sundays and I played Wednesday nights for a long time. But in 1984 or 83, thereabouts, I got the hankering to start playing baseball again. Softball just wasn't my game anymore. I wanted to play the small ball. So I started working out, and asked a friend of mine who I was working with at the Stone Pony. I knew he was a catcher and he was starting to play some games with his team. I said, is there a tryout or something that I can maybe come by and see if I can throw? So he said, yeah, we're practicing indoors for a couple of weeks till the weather gets better. So I went and I made the team. They liked what I did. Actually, during the wintertime, I was throwing inside of my office, which was down the street from the Stone Pony nightclub. And it had enough of like 60 feet, 6 inches, so I could put a little throwback thing, and I would throw all winter and got my form and my mechanics down. So I was okay when I started the tryout. So I started playing for the Monmouth Royals in the Jersey Shore League, and also Sunday mornings in the Garden State League. So the guys kind of knew that I knew the game, and they thought that maybe I can help out coaching, so they also made me a coach. So I was a player coach. When it came time to giving out the uniforms, they asked me what number I wanted. So I said, well, how about 36? So they asked me why, and I said, well, because that's my age. And all these guys were in their 20s. They couldn't believe that I was 36 years old and still playing baseball. But I was. Now, it progressed from the Jersey Shore League to having a team of college prospects in what's called the Atlantic Collegiate League. So I started coaching in that league, which was a league for, like I said, college prospects, guys that were considered by the pros eventually because they were in college and they were good players. But it was mostly for scouts to come by and check out the players there. Got to be friendly with a bunch of scouts, and they asked me to help them with a tryout, and that was the actual Bellino brothers who scouted for the Reds. So I helped them do a tryout in New Brunswick, I believe it was. Then I got to be friends with some really dear friends of mine now, the Malera brothers, and they asked me to help them with the tryout. So I went through batting practice for about an hour until my arm was hanging. And afterwards, Joe and Tony Malera asked me to, go out afterwards, which was kind of a ritual for scouts, which I didn't know, and go out to have lunch with them. And I was introduced to their boss, Region Scout, Billy Blitzer. So they came over and said, why don't you have lunch with us? We're going to, sit around and talk a little bit. And I said, I got to take a rain check because I got to go to work tonight and I want to go home, take a shower, et cetera, et cetera. So they said, no, maybe you should have lunch with us. And I wasn't getting the hint at the time. So Billy Blitzer comes over and he says, maybe you should have lunch with us. So I said, okay. He bent my elbow, and then they asked me if I wanted to consider being an associate scout, which in layman's terms was a guy who would beat the bushes. You might call him a bird dog. So I have been doing that since 1992 for the Chicago Cubs. And I've heard all the jokes about being a Cub scout. But it's been fun, and it's great because there's really no pressure. I go to games when I want to. I find good players and, make my recommendations. Now, I've had some people that have been mentors of mine, including Mr. Blitzer and the Bolinos and the Malaras, but it also includes a guy by the name of Eddie Ford. Now, his nickname was the Fa, F-A-A. Now, Eddie was a sports writer for the Jersey Journal, and he was also involved with a lot of sports and recreation facilities and the little leagues, et cetera, in Jersey City. So everybody knew this guy because he was a sports writer, et cetera. And it turns out he got his nickname when he went out to dinner to a Chinese restaurant with former New Jersey Nets basketball player, Mike O'Koren. I believe that's his name. Anyway, he introduces Fa to the waiter, or Eddie Ford at the time, and the waiter couldn't pronounce his last name. So Ford became Fa. And then from then on, Eddie Ford was the Fa. Now, another guy who is well respected and revered in the baseball industry was a scout called the Jet. That's his nickname, the late Ralph DeLulo, who signed some very famous ball players. And he would take me aside at some of the tryouts and said, watch this and watch that and look for this. And you got a head on your shoulders. And one day when I had returned one of his phone calls, he called back on and left a message on my machine and said, which was the best compliment anybody could ever get from somebody like him, that you're a good baseball man. And I remember that to the day and thank him eternally for that. And give us an idea, how you got involved in music and, what you've been doing lately and through the years in the realm of the music business. Well, I've been playing guitar since I was 11 years old when I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1963. And Mom and Dad were kind enough to get me music lessons and buy me my first guitar, which I still have today. And it's standing on the wall there in the background. Still plays pretty good too. So throughout high school and college, I played in some garage bands. But then it got to a point where I was kind of tired of arguing with other guys in the bands, and they weren't too serious, and I was a little more serious than they were. So I decided that I was going to be interested in getting on the radio, because records didn't argue with you. They didn't have a chance. So I was at Monmouth College at the time in West Long Branch, New Jersey, and decided I wanted to be on the radio. So I went to a meeting in the student center, and all of a sudden they kind of liked the way I sounded as far as my voice was concerned. So I got a radio show Saturday mornings from 9 to 12. And back then, you had to play the national anthem, and you had to sign on reading things that the FCC had written for you, and it had to be perfect. But I got to play music that I wanted to play until about noontime. So that was my first year in radio. The second year, in the summertime, the general manager was not going to be around. So they said, why don't you take care of things while, the summer session. So I got a lot of chances to be on the air. When somebody wouldn't show up for a shift, there I was. Somebody had to play the records. And at the time, I created another personality so people wouldn't think it was just me being there all the time. So I created the name Neil Sparks. So it was Late Night with Neil Sparks. So I got a lot of time on air and got to be pretty good at doing commercials in production. So one day, guy calls up, used to be at the college radio station, now was the general manager of the local radio station, WJLK, which was the radio voice of the Asbury Park Press. And the guy, Bob McAllen, said, do you know of anybody that may want a part-time job at the radio station? And I said, come to think of it, me. So then I started working at WJLK, AM and FM, 1310 and 94.3 FM. So they were a station that was actually one of the first ones in the country to be computerized. There were no disc jockeys anymore, except a morning show that ran for 4 hours or so, hosted. It was kind of like a news program and some entertainment news and things like that. No music though. So I would come in at 10 o'clock and I'd be recording commercials and record some programs and things like that. And one day, the general manager comes into the office where I was working and said, do you think we could do a live concert? And I said, I've done a bunch of them at Monmouth College, so I don't see why not. So I decided that we were going to be whatever they were going to tell us to do. And it turns out that it was a call from Epic Records in New York, and a local band called Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes were going to celebrate the release of their first album at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park, New Jersey, with a live broadcast that was going to be on 9 stations. And the reason why they called us was because they had approached originally WNEW-FM, which was the hottest rock station in New York City. And unfortunately, they couldn't come to an agreement because the guys at WNEW-FM wanted Bruce Springsteen to sign an agreement that he was going to appear that night. And Bruce don't do that. So they went elsewhere, and I was the elsewhere. So in 1976, I was part of a now famous broadcast from the Stone Pony in Asbury Park of Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes celebrating the release of their first album. Now, I got to be friendly with the 2 owners of the club, and then eventually they said, can you help us do some promotion, public relations, that kind of stuff? I said, yeah, I could do some part-time stuff for you. Eventually, that led to a full-time job. So that started full-time in 1977 and went until bankruptcy in 1991. Then in 2000, some investors from Jersey City, my old hometown, were coming to Asbury Park to reopen the Stone Pony and asked me to resume my activities and help bring the club back to its former glory. So that lasted 3 years, which included being the announcer on a studio, I'm sorry, not a studio, but a recorded album at the Stone Pony by Clarence Clemens and his band Temple of Soul. So I'm the voice that has said for many years on his album, Live in Asbury Park, I say, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome home Mr. Clarence Clemens. So I did that for 3 years or so, and then I had to pay attention to family. I had a little youngin' on the way, and she didn't like when I went to work, and neither did the wife. So way back in 2000, I'd say 11, they asked me to host a show at the Stone Pony of a reunion. So I came back to do some announcing, and then afterwards I started doing some concerts again, and of course being a DJ. In 1986, I helped write a song with local musicians Bobby Bandiera and Joel Kraus, two of the most talented people that you ever want to meet, as well as Eddie Testa, who was in a band called the Cruisers. And between the three or four of us, we wrote a song called We've Got the Love, which was put out by Arista Records and sold about 300,000 copies. It raised money and awareness for hunger-related charities, especially the food bank in Newark, Community Food Bank of New Jersey. So that is kind of my claim to fame as far as music is concerned. I do a radio show now, which started about 5 years ago, called Radio Jersey, and it's on 2 hours a day on www.asburymusic.com. And I get to play all the music I want to play. Nobody has to tell me what to play, and it's all from New Jersey. So now we've actually started this TV show called Round the Horn. So what I had was, as an idea during this pandemic, to talk to some of my music friends about baseball, because it turns out a lot of baseball players are musicians or interested in music, and vice versa. Some musicians are ball players as well too, or avid fans. So I'm putting two and two together, and that's it, Round the Horn. Well, that'll wrap things up for today's show. Thanks for coming by, and we'll see you all next week. Take care. Good night.